Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'll be responding to a big think video called Why Upgrading Humanity is a Transhumanist Myth. The video was hosted by Douglas Rushkoff and was uploaded on the 20th of January 2019. As opposed to just the still image of an achievement icon for Deus Ex Human Revolution, I shall be playing footage from a round of Team Fortress 2 during my segments when I'm responding to him. I think it'll make the video a little bit more interesting to watch, and it will also inadvertently prove a point against some things he has stated. Let's begin.
I think we still know so little about what it means to be human that the confidence with which we think we can upload ourselves to silicon or recreate ourselves with algorithms is shocking to me. The only ones out there who think they know what human consciousness is are computer engineers.
Well, them schools of philosophers, certain neuroscientists who overestimate their abilities, and quite honestly, I'm pretty sure the average Joe would think he knows more about consciousness than he really does. It is true that consciousness by nature is still largely a mystery, but that does not, however, discount the idea that we would eventually be able to upload our consciousness into a machine.
If you talk to actual brain researchers and neuroscientists, they say we're nowhere close. We don't even know for sure what goes on in a single square centimeter of soil. We're still trying to teach agriculture companies that the soil is alive, that it's not just dirt that you can put chemicals on. It's a living matrix. If we don't even know what a single centimeter of soil is, how do we know what the human brain is? We don't.
I'm not sure what soil composition has to do with whether or not we're able to upload our consciousness into a machine. Certainly, you aren't implying that just because we're in the dark about this one aspect of understanding nature means that there's no hope for us in achieving something in a completely different field. That would be a very silly logical fallacy to make there. But there are a few things worth pointing out all the same. One of the things is, despite as of 2019 we apparently don't know what goes on in a single square centimeter of soil, we have achieved agriculture. We've achieved agriculture thousands of years ago, before anything really of modern science was known about or understood. And these companies who seem to believe that just throwing chemicals into the soil makes plants is a viable method aren't exactly wrong, because that's how agriculture is done. It's working out really well, actually, since we're able to produce more food and sustain a larger population than what would be naturally possible. And the other thing is, as mentioned before, just because we're ignorant in this one field of study doesn't mean that a completely different endeavor in a completely different field is impossible. Especially with, as I've pointed out, we're able to do things without having all the information at hand. We didn't understand how quantum physics and mechanics work when we utilize electricity on an industrial scale. It's still largely a mystery to us, but GPS systems and modern day computers rely on our half-baked understanding of that field. The first vaccine was invented before we knew what a germ was. We were breeding animals before we understood how traits are passed down from parent to offspring. I mean, really, this doesn't seem like that big of an issue for this endeavor, considering all the other endeavors we've done with such little information.
We don't know what the source of consciousness is. We don't know where we come from. We don't even know if there's a meaning to this universe or not.
Consciousness comes from the brain. Whatever little we know about consciousness and how it works, and the process that leads to this emergent property, we understand very bloody well that comes from the brain. That's no longer a mystery. And as for where we come from, well, Douglas Rushkoff, the professor of digital economics at Queen's, there's this biological process called evolution in which populations undergo changes over time by means of mutations that they pass on to their offspring. So two individuals will have a kid and their DNA will essentially combine with each other and undergo these small incremental changes that would lead to the offspring being slightly different than their parents. And some of these changes might be beneficial, most of them are neutral, and some of them are deleterious. And over long periods of time, these very, very small changes result in very extreme changes. I'm not exactly sure what kind of education it takes to be a professor of digital economics, especially at Queen's, but I think they need to have a much higher standard if that's a question you're asking, because it's been answered over 150 years ago. As for whether or not there is a meaning to the universe itself, the purpose of life itself is to survive long enough to pass on your genetic material. Now, human beings have been able to escape this purpose by gaining higher thought by means of language, of art, of science, philosophy, that we're able to choose as individuals what we think our purpose in life should be. But that doesn't necessarily change the rule of nature. But for the universe itself, it seems like there isn't a purpose to it. It's just something that exists. It goes on, guided by the clockwork mechanisms of the laws of physics. And that's that. But whether or not the universe has a purpose doesn't negate the possibility of us uploading our consciousness into machines. Hell, even if we didn't know what evolution was, it wouldn't make that an impossibility. Although I would argue that understanding that human beings and how we think and the fact we think is part of a natural process rather than anything supernatural in origin is a major step to the road to the idea of we should be able to upgrade ourselves and upload our minds into machines.
Yet we think that we can make a simulation that's as valid as this.
Yes, the whole history of our endeavors when it comes to making simulations seems to show that they progress toward being more realistic, more complex, having much more emotional attachment to them by the person utilizing them. It'll require far more processing power, it'll be far more complex than anything we have today. It'll require more energy, it'll take more time, it'll require the development of hardware and software that simply does not exist right now, but if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, I don't see a reason why it's impossible. Hell, even if it does violate the laws of physics, we're such a fucking stubborn species, we might just usurp those for the sake of having our simulation. But I wouldn't hold my breath on that last one.
Every simulation we make misses something.
True, but again, as technology progresses, the simulations get better. The capabilities of those simulations improve.
The difference between being in a jazz club and listening to a great CD. There's a difference, and some of those differences we understand and some of them we don't. So when I see people rushing off to upload consciousness to a chip, it feels more like escape from humanity than it is a journey forward.
Well, first of all, where are these people rushing off to? Because the technology doesn't exist yet. And second of all, you could argue, yes, it is an escape from humanity. A lot of our simulations and digital worlds are just that. For example, this video game I was playing right here. But that doesn't mean it's also not a journey forward. There's a lot that can be gained from spending time in virtual worlds, even if it's just a little bit of entertainment.
I get it. Life is scary. I mean, women, real life women are scary. The people are scary. The moisture is scary. Death is scary. Babies are scary. Other people who don't speak the same language or have the same customs, they're scary. All sorts of stuff is scary. And I understand the idea of this kind of having a Sim City perfected simulation that I can go into and not have to worry about all that stuff I don't know, where everything is discrete, everything is a yes, no, this, that, all the choices have been made. There's a certain attractiveness to that, but that's dead. It's not alive. There's no wonder. There's no awe. There's nothing strange and liminal.
Now, one thing I think he misses is that these simulations are being made to better and better simulate reality. Not all of them, not this Team Fortress 2 game, for example, but Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, has put in a lot of time and effort to look realistic, to have realistic elements, to have subtle details that you would expect from a realistic environment, such as the infamous fact that horse testicles shrink and grow depending on the temperature outside. So all these scary things that you talk about are going to be included more and more into our virtual worlds. Women are included in our virtual worlds. Babies are. Foreigners are. Moisture is. And they'll be included even more in an even more realistic manner as time goes on. And also, really, no awe, no wonder, no weirdness. I would argue virtual worlds can achieve that far better and far easier than the real world stuff. Where in the world could I take a rocket launcher, shoot it at my feet, fly through the air, and then fire another rocket at some weird German doctor firing a healing beam at some loudmouth, super fast little Boston boy slapping enemy team members with some fish rolled up in newspaper? It's not a damn place on earth I can do that, but it's a fairly common occurrence in this virtual world here. The wonderful thing about virtual worlds is that they can simulate things that are impossible in the real world. You can be anywhere you want, at any time you want, if the virtual world is built that way. You can be on other planets, ones that exist and ones that don't, and interact with alien life that may or may not exist in our own universe. You can be in fantasy settings, fighting dragons, riding unicorns, shooting elves, those self-righteous fucks. The game Scorn coming out interests me so much because of its setting. It invokes a lot of wonder and awe in it, this strange new world that I haven't seen before in real life, and I haven't even seen that much in virtual worlds either. There's really nothing about a virtual world that can't inspire awe or wonder or weirdness. Anything in the real world can be simulated to a good degree, depending on the level of technology that exists and how detailed and skilled the people making the virtual world are, and that'll only get better with time. We're not going to start making shittier technology.
Ambiguous about it. I was on a panel with a famous transhumanist, and he was arguing that it's time that human beings come to accept that we will have to pass the torch of evolution to our digital successors, and that once computers have the singularity and they're really thinking and better than us, then we should really only stick around as long as the computers need us, to keep the lights on and oil their little circuits or whatever we have to do, and then after that, fade into oblivion. And I said, hey, no, wait a minute. Human beings are still special. We're weird. We're quirky. We've got David Lynch movies and weird yoga positions and stuff we don't understand, and we're ambiguous and weird and quirky. We deserve a place in the digital future.
Not knowing who he's talking about, it could very well be that that was the position that particular transhumanist took. It could also be that there is nuance to the position and details that went over this guy's head or he didn't understand, and in his attempt at paraphrasing that transhumanist position, he has done so rather poorly. Or the worst possibility, he is deliberately misrepresenting that transhumanist position for the sake of making him out to be, or her out to be for that matter, an even bigger asshole than they otherwise would be. I would like to point out, however, that in simulating an environment and uploading our consciousness into machines, that would still be trying to simulate reality and all the wonderful, whimsical, weird stuff about it, and we would still be simulating how human beings feel, how they act, how they think, and all the nuances and subtlety and wonderful aspects of the species. We're not going to then just suddenly start simulating completely different people than ourselves into these computer environments that he's talking about. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be simulating ourselves. And if it's not a simulation, a straight up uploading ourselves. If you upload your consciousness into a machine and it acts completely different than what you do, and it should actually be you, it should be like cut and paste and not copy and paste, then that's a pretty shitty system that doesn't actually work. David Lynch would be able to make all the weird movies he'd want in a well-crafted uploading scenario. He might even be less restricted when it comes to making movies than he would be in real life, given that materials, time, money, and all the different aspects of making movies might not be a problem in a virtual world. And yoga positions, I'm pretty fucking sure in a simulation or virtual world or whatever, we'd be able to contort our bodies into weird ways. We might even be able to contort our bodies into ways that wouldn't be possible in real life. Also, if you don't put value into the quirky and weird nature of humanity, this argument means nothing to you. Human beings are quirky and that'll be, gotten rid of in time and replaced by an AI or something. Wonderful, sign me up. The argument rests on the other person having the same values that he does.
And he said, oh, Rushkoff, you're just saying that because you're human. As if it's hubris, right? Oh, I'm just defending my little team. And that's
not hubris. intrinsic bias. You're defending humanity because you are human and thus have an emotional attachment to the concept of humanity, even if we don't fully understand it.
That's where I got the idea. All right, fine, I'm a human. I'm on team human. And it's not team human against the algorithms or against anything other than those who want to get rid of the humans. I think humans deserve a place.
You spent the first part of the video arguing that we wouldn't be able to simulate or upload our consciousness. And you've done so with very poor arguments, I might add, but it was still your argument nonetheless. That the human mind is so complex and we know so little of it that we wouldn't be able to put it into an algorithm or turn an algorithm into it. The human mind versus the algorithm.
Certainly until we understand what it is we are, we shouldn't get rid of us. And as far as I'm concerned, we're cool. We're still weird and funny and wonderful. And yeah, we destroyed the environment. We did really nasty things. But I would argue we do those things when we're less than human. We do those things when we can dehumanize others. You can't have slaves if you're thinking of those as people. You can only have slaves if you're thinking of them as something other than people. And this desire to transcend the human, I feel like it's excusing a whole lot of behaviors. It's excusing a whole lot of dehumanization. It makes it easier to send kids into caves to get rare earth metals for your phone. It makes it easier to create toxic waste everywhere. It makes it easier for you to think of the human timeline as having a beginning, middle, and an end because we're going to transcend it. And that's a sick Western, neoliberal, growth-based, apocalyptic myth that could very well end our species, but really, I would say to the detriment of our little universe.
Alright, there's a lot to dismantle there, so bear with me. So this person's argument is that in our quest to transcend humanity, by means of new technologies that don't exist yet, we are opening the doors to mindsets that would allow for injustices and horrors, such as slavery, such as egregious child labor, such as environmental destruction. However, slavery, child labor, environmental destruction, those have existed for as long as human beings have existed. Barring the last one, environmental destruction, those other things have existed more before the modern era of this neoliberal, Western, whatever, than it does now and likely after it. What human civilization hasn't had slaves? It's something that's as old as civilization itself. And sending children into mines to extract rare earth metals? Again, something that has been going on for thousands of years. At least we're now using it for phones. It used to just be for jewelry and valuable items that only the very wealthy would have access to. But now there's child labor laws, at least in industrialized nations, where human rights are seen as a priority. And those human rights, as a concept, fighting against child labor, existed closer to the modern era with all our technology than it has in any previous point in human history. The very concept of children shouldn't be sent into caves and die extracting minerals and metals is a fairly new thing. And you yourself even argue that humanity is pretty intrinsically shitty. Your host spiel about women are scary, babies are scary, foreigners are scary. You say that because that's like the natural inclination, the general thought we're predisposed to as human beings, and thus you believe we want to turn to these virtual worlds so we don't have to confront these frightening things. But in our modern age, in our Western industrial landscape, in our virtual landscapes even, we are much more accepting of different people than we ever have before. Language barriers aren't as much of an issue in virtual forums where Google Translate exists, where we can just automatically convert one language into another so that's legible, and thus we can talk to these foreigners as we could talk to anyone who speaks our same dialect. That didn't exist for the vast majority of human history. Women's rights didn't exist for the vast majority of human history. That is also something that is fairly recent and fairly modern. And child labor, that thing again, that's more something you find in underdeveloped countries or industrial Eastern nations like China or India, not from Western nations. Human beings are unbelievably shitty, but by improving our technological prowess, we're able to overcome that a little bit. To quote George Orwell, men are only as good as their technological development allows them to be. We are able to embrace new moral and ethical ideals because technology makes life easier than it otherwise would have been in the past. You condemn slavery, and I would say rightfully so in the modern era, where machines are able to do so much of the work once relegated to slaves. But in the past, that luxury didn't exist. If you have masses and masses of fields that you want quickly, cheaply, and efficiently harvested, you would need to get yourself some slaves. It was never seen as any egregious violation of human rights back then. It was just an aspect of society that existed. And in 100 years, there'll be people looking back at us with the very same sort of scorn. It might be the most egregious thing in the world to kill and then eat an animal's meat, because in the future we'd all grow it from in some lab without the need for such slaughter or brutality. The technology doesn't exist today, but it will exist at some point, and then people will be judging others based on that standard. Looking back at the past before this technology with rose-tinted glasses, and how technology is what makes men able to be eviler, is just an outright denial of reality at hand. Technology has allowed us to be more environmentally conscious than ever before. We're able to actually study the effects we have on the world around us, and we're able to develop new technologies that are supposed to assist us in doing what we want or need to do, but without the egregious negative impact that technology at the start of the industrial era up until now has had. Or would you be more in favor of just unplugging civilization and returning to a pre-industrial technology without the possibility of moving forward because of the effects it has? Technology will eventually make human labor obsolete, let alone child labor. And again, child labor laws are a recent thing. Something that has happened coincidentally after the Industrial Revolution, when we started focusing more on technology. And as far as timelines go, yeah, it did have a beginning. The beginning is quite vague due to the nature of evolution, but there was a point when we were, as a species, not human as we are now. And we may very well transcend that humanity. We may become unrecognizable as a human, something that seems to be a different species. And it would be by our hand and not any natural process. That's not a bad thing. Civilizations rise and fall. The biggest companies that has ever existed on the planet no longer exist, and the same, Goliaths of companies that are around now might no longer exist. Who we are as people right now, all our thoughts, our opinions, our feelings, might not exist. The bodies and brains that we have might still exist. They might be altered due to technology and genetic engineering, but we'll grow up to be different people down the line. It's not a bad thing. It's just how it works, how it happens. You can't demand that the universe be static, because that's just not how it works. It's not how it works in the past, and it's increasingly not working right now as things move faster and faster due to our ever-growing technological prowess. So that concludes the video. Suffice to say, I disagree with him. Technology can allow for very shitty people to be shittier, but in general, technology has made not only our lives better, but also ourselves better. And we should not scorn the possibility of upgrading ourselves due to the ignorance at hand as of today. Being able to upload our minds into a machine doesn't exist yet. The technology isn't there. And we don't understand everything about how the mind works. To declare an impossibility based on that is egregious. We will learn more about the brain and how it works and the nature of consciousness. And similarly, we will eventually, or possibly, I shouldn't say it's an inevitability, but we could very well figure out how to upload our minds into machines and live in virtual worlds. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, that I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.